how to help girls listen to themselves. They enter this world with intuitive wisdom, and we try to beat it out of them. And so how do we give them the space to be in touch with it and to listen to it and to nurture it and grow it? And it's not that easy. You think you have all the best intentions, but there's so many ways in which our acculturation affects caregiving that makes it harder to do that. We're gonna make all kinds of mistakes, but we can always repair, and that in itself is some of the most powerful parenting you can do. You don't have to be perfect to do this. You actually have to screw up. You actually have to make mistakes. And then you can process those mistakes. You can have a bad day and be like, you know what? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you about your dirty room. It was not about your dirty room. It was about this email I just got. I'm gonna go have a cup of tea, respond to that email. Can we have a do-over?
Today on the Badass Leaders podcast, we're joined by Kate Rowe, an award-winning journalist, author, and storyteller dedicated to helping us all be strong and badass humans. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many more. She's the author of Strong as a Mother and Strong as a Girl, a guide to raising girls who know their worth and trust their own wisdom. Kate is also the co-executive producer of the Audible original Soldiers of Science and has led editorial teams for organizations focused on mental health and suicide prevention. We talked about one thing I'm very passionate about, helping us understand how to raise and grow the best humans so that our future leaders are strong and badass. In this particular, we're talking about learning the skills as caregivers, teachers, the parents, siblings, people who are mentors, teaching us how to instill amazing skill sets into the young women of today. There's some amazing vulnerable moments. Some favorite ones of mine include the conversations we had about eating disorders and how to learn and grow through those, and how to help us learn how to be vulnerable with our children and teach them how to own their mistakes and own the moments where maybe they're just not feeling so great. So they need to take a pause and a redo. So make sure you check out the show notes, share a comment or two, and tell us what you're doing to help raise the next generation of young women leaders. Badass women leaders. I love it. So let's do this. Let's jump into this episode of the Badass Leaders podcast, where I get the opportunity to sit down with experts for candid conversations about the challenges and joys of just being a human. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss future episodes. Okay, let's dive in and get ready to unlock your full badass potential. So, welcome to AGN Studios and the Badass Leaders podcast. Kate, why don't we dig in and talk about you as a human being? So, first off, just tell us a little bit about who you are. We're going to talk about your books, do a little steal into that, and about where you're at today. But tell us a little bit about who you are as a human.
I'm so glad you asked me that. I'm glad you had me on here. Thank you. I do identify as a human first and foremost, so that's a good place to start. I'm a mom of two amazing girls. I live in Atlanta with my husband. I've been a journalist most of my career, and in my journalism, I focus on mental health and supporting people just being humans, because that's kind of the most important thing to me as a person, is that we're all able to be vulnerable with each other and get support when we need it. So that really drives everything I do.
How did you get interested in journalism? I mean, were you the young kid walking around with a microphone saying, I want to interview you, or with a pencil saying, I want to write your story, and always wanted to be a journalist? Or did something happen in your life that really moved you in that direction?
Something happened. So I graduated from college and I wanted to be a women's advocacy attorney. I don't think I even knew what that meant, but it sounded good. So I was applying for two kinds of jobs. I was applying for jobs at domestic violence centers, support centers, and I was applying for jobs as a paralegal. And there were no jobs available at the domestic violence centers because of...
Now, did you go to law school?
No.
Okay.
This was right after college.
Okay, got
So
it.
I just was going to try out being a paralegal. And I didn't even know where I was applying because I was running out the door to one of my interviews, and I said to my boyfriend at the time, I'm going to interview with this law firm, Ernst & Young. And he was like, that's not a law firm. I said, what do you mean it's not a law firm? I'm going to be it's a paralegal job. He said, that's a general counsel's office. I was like, what is a general counsel? So I had no idea. But I got the job. That was my first job out of college. And one of the things I got assigned to do was their sexual harassment investigations. Oh. So I was doing both securities class actions, which were totally new and foreign territory to me, and then sexual harassment investigations, which were more in line with what I thought I would want to do as a lawyer. And the minute I got into the room with the first person, they all happened to be men that we were investigating all over the West Coast, working for Ernst & Young. And the minute I got into the first interview room with a man, I just got him. I just could kind of read his humanity. And not that I thought that was an excuse, but I understood how he got into that chair. I could see in him, he's insecure. He has these kind of issues. He had a relationship in the office, and when it ended, he couldn't handle it, and he handled it totally wrong. And now, so I could see his humanity.
Right.
Then I could see the collateral damage. Now he's going to go home to his wife and kids and say, I lost my job because of this horrible thing that's going to rock their world, right?
Right.
So I just knew very quickly after doing those that yes, these laws should exist. People should be held accountable. We need to protect people through them. But I'm not the one to mete out the punishment. I'm not the one to be on one side of an issue. So I knew that, but I didn't know yet what I would do with that. Parallel to this, my grandfather, who always wanted me to be a broadcast journalist, which I don't know where he got that from. I did write as a kid creatively, but I had no interest in journalism. I don't know why. He just thought I would be a great broadcast journalist. And he sent me a subscription to the New Yorker in college. But I was in college and I was reading textbooks and I did not want to read one extra thing. So I put them all in the bathroom and my roommates and I just read the cartoons when we were in the bathroom. He would write me letters. He would say, what did you think of thus and so article? He'd usually ask me about 3 articles. And I would wait to respond because I thought, well, then he won't remember that he asked me about articles that I haven't read. Oh. So I'd wait to respond. So the last thing he sent me was a postcard where he asked about 3 articles. I waited to respond, and he had a stroke. Mm. And I spoke with him in the hospital shortly thereafter, and I said, I owe you a letter. And he said, his halting speech, he said, yes, you do, And then he died 2 days later. Mm. So I went to his service and gave a eulogy that was actually a thank you letter to him for introducing me to the world of ideas and writing and having faith in me and other things that he did. And then I went back to LA and I had this hour commute to Ernst & Young because I was living in Orange County and Ernst & Young was downtown LA. And I started reading my New Yorkers back to back. Like it was like this guilt-driven campaign.
So you had actually kept them all this period of time. I had kept
all of them. Yeah.
Wow.
And I distinctly remember, excuse me, I was on the metro home and I was reading an article on mad cow disease. Hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm learning about agriculture. I'm learning about trade law. I'm learning about neuroscience. I'm learning about, meat rendering. And I'm fascinated. I'm totally hooked on this story. I thought, this is what I want to do. And then expanding that to sort of incorporate what my experience was as a paralegal was, I want to be able to just tell all the sides of a story and allow people to come to their own conclusions. I want to be able to show the humanity that is an ingredient into all stories. And people can do with that what they will. Literally within a month, I had an internship at Mother Jones Magazine in San Francisco, and I moved up there. They paid me $100 a month.
This was what year?
This was 97.
Okay.
And I went into the head of the general. I had a great time at Ernst & Young for that year that I was paralegal. And I went into the general counsel's office and I was like, I'm moving to San Francisco. I'm becoming a journalist. I'm working for Mother Jones Magazine. And he said to me, Gene Erbstoser, I still remember his name. He said to me, are they going to pay you? I said, yes, $100 a month. And he said, well, why don't you slow your roll? What about if you worked for us from up there? You could work out of a law firm that we contract with up there, and then you would have food for rent. I mean,
Right,
then you would
'cause
have money
$100
for
a month
rent
is
and food.
nothing.
Yeah, it was a travel stipend. So they did that. So I went to San Francisco. I worked from 6 to 10 a.m. at this law firm for Ernst & Young. I went to Mother Jones from 10 to 6. I went back to the law firm from 6 to 11. I went home and slept for however many hours. I can't do math. And I consider that my journalism school. So I never went to journalism school, but I put those hours in for a year, and that's what got me into journalism.
Wow. I'm exhausted just thinking about.
Can you imagine working like that now?
No. I even, so in the world that I'm living right now with running Biolocity and my consulting and podcast, and I've been talking about this a lot. I've been saying it's almost like when we were younger and working 3 jobs to be able to do the thing you really love to do the most. And that's what this reminds me of. And
right. But then why are we still working 3 jobs?
Well, because I really want to still continue to interview amazing people like you, right? And I don't want to give that up. And so, but it is exhausting, right? But I also think of when I was younger. So, I mean, when I went back to school and got my engineering degree at Georgia Tech as a single mom with a special needs 2-year-old. I have no idea how I did that.
Right.
We were so.
You can't even sort of remember what it was like to have that energy. And yes. Exactly. And there's one more step to the story that gets me to the kind of journalism I do, which was when I got to Mother Jones, it was all about investigative journalism, which was, like figuring out the bad guys. What were they doing wrong? It wasn't gotcha journalism necessarily, but it definitely was like digging up the dirt. And I still wasn't comfortable with that. So I felt like a bit of a failure as an intern at Mother Jones because I just didn't have that drive to be an investigative journalist. But the creative director there liked to do big pieces. And so like he put me on this piece about the destruction of the coral reefs. And that I loved. That was like the mad cow disease. Yes. It was like an exploration of all the factors that play into this issue. And so I got my money's worth.
Or your time's worth.
Yeah, my time's worth.
Their money's worth.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about storytelling then. Okay, so you've built a career around storytelling that uplifts others. And I was thinking about when you were talking about meeting the sexual predators or whatever the title of that was and struggling with that. I've often said the same thing, is that I really don't want to serve on juries because I also see the human of both sides and can see how someone ended up at that spot. And once again, have the feeling that it doesn't excuse the behavior. It absolutely cannot happen in society. There are things, but I also am a strong believer that we don't do a really good job at all of rehabilitating individuals when they do go to prison. And I also believe that people put this stigma on these individuals who have committed these crimes and forget that they're human beings and that there's so much, for example, trauma that leads to it. Brian Rowe, when I interviewed him for his podcast episode, he has this gorgeous book. Actually, it's right over there, Crisis, Rage, Reflection, and Reality. The book is absolutely gorgeous. And it's a bunch of inmates who have done art and written stories about basically their trauma and how it led to that. So I just think about the tie of seeing humans as humans and how that can really drive what you want to do.
Yeah, and that's who we need on juries, by the way, because I mean, people are wrongly convicted all the time. There are mitigating factors that should influence the kind of punishment, if you will, the kind of outcome they're going to have. So I completely agree. Hurt people, you know? And so it doesn't mean we should let them but it means that we should help them stop.
Yes.
In a productive way.
Absolutely.
And not just contribute more to the problem. And by the way, I loved on his episode, his bit about how that there was a Chinese character for Crisis that was both something hard, that like the way we think of crisis, and the other was like opportunity.
Yes. And it's like fire. Fire can burn things down or it can cook food.
It can generate new growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, really impactful. Okay, so going back to you've built a career around storytelling that uplifts others. And this is a little bit of what we've talked about, but let's dig in a little deeper about a moment or influence early in your life that sparked your passion for telling meaningful human stories. So you talked about your passion for telling stories that help us understand things in nature that are scientific. But what was your passion for the human piece?
Well, I did do a story very early on when I was at San Francisco Magazine on a program in the San Francisco jail that used different approaches with violent offenders, most of whom were young men. There's a lot of intimate partner violence. They'd obviously grown up with a lot of violence. And it was meditation and yoga and talking through feelings and therapy and understanding and conflict resolution and learning how to navigate a conflict without escalating to violence. And that was very profound, being in the room with those young men who were so vulnerable, so open and vulnerable with me, and were clearly working so hard to change the trajectory they found themselves on. So I think that was one moment where I really felt like, okay, this kind of stuff is what I want to be writing about.
Yeah. It's a big reason that I love doing this podcast, is that I think these stories need to be told. People need to hear these stories, and it's really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've worked with everyone from journalists to doctors to mental health advocates. What kind of community or support system do you personally rely on to stay grounded in such emotionally demanding work?
So as far as a support system that includes people, that would be, I have an amazing best friend. I have an amazing husband. So they're my two go-tos right away. But I also have an extended community here and in I've lived lots of different places in my life, so in other cities. And I pretty much wear my heart on my sleeve. I can't really connect with you if I don't tell you exactly what's happening for me that day.
Yes.
So I just do that. I'm an external processor, and I'm really lucky to have people who are willing to listen because I talk a lot. And when I know I'm in trouble when I'm not reaching out to them. That's when I know, okay, I'm really suffering inside because I don't want to touch it. And talking to other people would mean touching it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about how you moved from journalism, or not moved from, because I know you still do that, but what made you decide one day, I'm going to write a book? And then what also inspired you to write the type of books we're going to talk about in a moment?
Yeah. Well, I was laid off from my last magazine job at Life magazine when my daughter, who is now in college, was 15 months old. And I'd always wanted to try my hand at freelance, but had never sort of felt safe not having a paycheck every 2 weeks. But I got a good severance package, so I thought, well, this is my time. At the same time, my pregnancy with her, I've always known that I wanted to be a mom. It's been the one thing I've known I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up for a long, long time until that epiphany moment, but I knew I wanted to be a mom. My brother was born when I was 10, and I was sort of more of a mother figure to him.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, let's do it, And then I had a really medically challenging pregnancy that was really quite scary, and I developed postpartum anxiety afterward. And so that all happened before I went freelance. But the thing I felt when I was having a medically challenging pregnancy was alienation from all the narratives about what pregnancy is supposed to be and what motherhood is supposed to be. And I was reading these books that were like, if you have a headache, just like walk by an aspirin and kind of look at it, but don't take it because it'll potentially kill your baby, And I was like, I just got out of a hospital where I had nuclear radio tides put in my blood so that they could look at my heart. I felt like I wasn't reflected in any of the books I was reading. And I remember after coming out of the hospital over Memorial Day weekend, after being there for 5 days, I went to a prenatal yoga class, and we were sitting in this sunny room in Brooklyn, and they were saying, what is your goal for your pregnancy, for your baby? And your birth, and people were saying, well, I'd like to have a natural birth. I'm like, and I was like, I'd like not to die. And I was so annoyed at all of them. I just said, I'd like not to die. I just got out of the ER. I'd like not to die, and I'd like my baby to be born healthy. That's it. All the other things I thought I cared about are gone. So when I went freelance, I immediately wanted to write a book about how to survive a difficult pregnancy. And I met a maternal fetal medicine expert who who wrote the textbook on prescribing medication during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And he said, well, I've been wanting to write a book. So the first thing I did was do that book with him. So I never ended up doing the difficult pregnancy book. But after that, as I went through my postpartum anxiety, I realized I have to write about this. And so I wrote one of the first pieces about postpartum anxiety because back in a parenting magazine called Cookie, which was a really cool magazine, back then it was all postpartum depression.
Yes.
So I didn't recognize, like I was super high functioning, but not,
And I've actually never heard the term postpartum anxiety. It makes sense to me, but I've never heard anyone talk about that.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's more common than postpartum depression, but it's probably as common. And it's harder to recognize because you might be really like on top of things. You're not like the pamphlet they hand you when you leave the hospital of the sad lady in the armchair who's looking out the window. You don't feel like that. You're moving and grooving. You're not sleeping. In my case, I was like throwing up before work because I had so much anxiety and turmoil inside me. And then I got medication. I mean, I was in therapy, but that wasn't enough. I got on medication, and finally, like this alarm bell in my head, like I press snooze on it. And so I wrote that book. And then I went on actually to work at a maternal mental health nonprofit, and I was assigning stories on all, we treat motherhood as this completely normal, natural thing that comes easy. And it's so not. It's like the hardest thing.
Why do we do that?
I don't know.
That's insane.
I don't know. It's like one of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life. And so, in high school, you thought if you breathed wrong on a boy, you'd get pregnant. And then you try to get pregnant and find out it's actually this incredibly choreographed thing where everything has to align. Mm-hmm. So there's that, it's not necessarily easy to get pregnant. Then there's miscarriages, which are so common but not talked about. There's stillbirths, which are even more taboo. There's secondary infertility. There's just all these things. And then there's just raising a kid and sleep deprivation and pressure. And if you're not happy and loving every minute of it, you're not fitting the narrative. Right. So I wanted to write a book that said, hey, you are just as important as this being that is either in your belly or in the case of adoption, waiting for you to finish this process or surrogacy or whatever. You're just as important as that small person. And you need to take care of yourself first. The baby gets everything. You need to take care of yourself.
Right.
Just because you're a human and you deserve to feel good. But if that won't convince you, because it is a hard sell, because we've all bought this storyline, then because you'll be a better mom.
Right.
Too. Yeah. It's the oxygen mask thing. So that was that's what led me to write that book.
And the name of that book is?
Oh, right. Angela's my marketing guru. I'm very bad at it. Strong as a Mother, mm-hmm. How to be happy, healthy, and most importantly, sane from pregnancy to parenting.
I love it.
Yeah. And that's one of the only books out there that talks about that. So that was a real labor of love. And then the next book I wanted to write, I think I've always wanted to write, is a book on how to raise strong girls, because I made a very concerted effort with my girls to build a foundation for them that would help them just be ready for the world and the challenges it throws at female identifying people.
What made you, and you have copies of the book, so you can show what they look, hold it up so that we can see what
awesome
it looks
cover.
Like. I love that cover.
Yeah.
I really do.
The designer knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, that is a crush. And so what is it that, so Strong as a Mother and Strong as a Girl, what is it that helped you, I think most specifically, let's talk about Strong as a Girl, that you said, I want to help people learn how to raise strong girls. Like, was there a pivotal moment or something that you saw in society that was missing that really drove this passion for you?
I don't think I can point to one thing. I was raised by two feminist parents who really gave me a lot of space to be myself and to be comfortable in my own skin. So, sometimes you hear about people who go through a troubling childhood and that leads them to write the book about what they wish they had or whatever. It wasn't that. I felt like I got a lot of that support. So I wanted to offer that to my girls. Then I thought about some ways in which I have been compromised as a female in this culture, namely people pleasing, mm-hmm. and putting others' needs before my own. And I was in a 9-year relationship that I knew was wrong from the first conversation we had. And I just was trying to please the other person the entire time. And I didn't want that for my girls. So I felt like I have all this strength and comfort in myself, but I didn't have an inner core of what do I think? What do I want? What do I need? What's my opinion? That just, we we push that out of girls really quickly.
Yeah.
They're told the narrative is you got to be nice, you're accommodating, you're the peacemaker. Kindness is,
You're the caregiver.
You're the caregiver, So and girls biologically do have those instincts. So it's like a double whammy of the world telling them that's how they should be, and then their own natural ability to fulfill that expectation. So that was kind of the nugget of it. And I really did a very concerted campaign to have them touch into themselves before anybody else. That was sort of that's kind of the core of the whole message, is how to help girls listen to themselves. They enter this world with intuitive wisdom, and we try to beat it out of them. And so how do we give them the space to be in touch with it and to listen to it and to nurture it and grow it? And it's not that easy. It doesn't matter. We're all a product of this culture, right? So you think you have all the best intentions, but there's so many ways in which our acculturation affects caregiving that makes it harder to do that. We have all these narratives of not just what girls are supposed to be, but what success is supposed to look like.
Yes,
and, there's just an agenda that the outside world is constantly beaming at us. And so it takes concerted effort and some support and some quiet and space to push it back and to try and get in touch with, like, first of all, what are your goals for the girl in your life? And then as she articulates that, and then, helping her articulate what her goals are and helping those be the driving force of their lives instead of all these other stories, all these other narratives.
So when you were doing your research to write Strong as a Mother, was there anything that really surprised you during that journey?
I don't think so, really, because I had been working in that field for 5 years. That was a very different book to write because I felt like no one had written that book, and I had I'd lived it, and then I had immersed myself in those topics. So
how would you, like, what does that look like? How would you immerse yourself?
Well, because I was the editorial director of a maternal mental health nonprofit. Right. So I was assigning all these stories, editing all these stories, reading all these books, talking with clinicians. So I had probably to this day, I have a better understanding of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders than mental health professionals who don't specialize in them. Like, that's sort of like menopause or whatever. Yes. There's these areas where unless you've taken the time to get the extra training, it's just not part of the narrative. I think that's probably changing and improving. So I felt like I knew that book from beginning to end, what I wanted to say and how I wanted to roll it out, and it just came out of me. This one felt like, oh my God, there's lots of experts who talk about parenting. Yeah. Lots of experts who talk about parenting girls. There's 1,000 different directions this book could go in. I just had big moments of how am I going to do this? And
did you have moments of, are people going to want to read it? There's all this other stuff. Did you have any of those moments of doubt? Because it's hard to write a book. I mean, I've not written a book,
but you're going to. And we're going to work on it together.
We're going to work on it together, exactly. And yet, I just imagine that there are often times that the author pauses and thinks, is someone really going to want to read this book? Or is this worth the time? Or like all those self-doubts that are naturally human in us.
Yeah. I think I was more worried, what if I get it wrong? What if I,
Right.
I'm a journalist. I'm not a child development expert or a sexual assault prevention expert or an assertive speech expert. I'm a journalist. So what I do is I reach out to experts and I interview them, and it's their research, their knowledge that informs the book. And so in the beginning, I just thought, what do I have to add to the narrative?
Right.
Who am I to write this? Yes, I believe that what I did with my girls worked, not because I'm an expert, but because my job is to talk to experts who do all this stuff, and they help me at every step of the way. So that was more where I would have the doubts. The other experts I talked to for the book were girls themselves and caregivers, and I did focus groups with girls around the country, and that was those were the best moments of researching this book.
I bet that was just amazing. And just I just wonder, being in some of those rooms and absorbing from some amazing women that you learn so much from.
Yeah, I did. And it was so reassuring, because I think the reason most books that talk about raising girls focus on the teen and years and beyond, and it's a lot about damage control or troubleshooting, because that's when the big issues come up. And I really wanted to wade into the water when it's shallow and the rocks are small and you can teach them to swim. So when they hit the rapids downstream, both you and she can feel more confident in riding them, because you've got the skills, right? So I wanted to wade in early. I know all the scary statistics about the mental health of girls and boys and teens and people right now.
Right.
But I felt that, so sorry, to get back to the focus groups, knowing all these scary things, to go into these rooms with these young women, girls, it was about 11. I think the youngest was maybe 9 to early 20s. Their insight, their self-knowledge, their confidence, their reflexive inclusivity, their kindness toward each other, but willingness to challenge each other at the same time. I was just like, okay, girls are okay, you know? I mean, so that was really buoying for me to be in those rooms. And I learned a ton. And I was more surprised. So you asked, was I surprised by anything with Strong as a Mother? That's how we started this question.
Yes.
I was more surprised by things I learned when I was doing Strong as a Girl.
So what are a couple of those?
Well, one of them was how much, and this came from the girls I spoke with, girls and young women, how much the world really doesn't want to hear their difficult thoughts.
Oh.
They were told, I had this one young woman at Asoye who said, when I was 6, I was worried about big things. And I was worried about big things when I was 6. And I had a 6-year-old who was worried about big things. And I was just always told, don't worry about that. That's not for you. That's not your concern, and
so very dismissive.
Yeah. And I think it's natural. Sometimes parents are like, it's okay. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about that. But that doesn't do anything to reassure you. And it doesn't validate the fact that you've picked up on something that is not right,
Right.
So that was one thing. Anger, the fact that they really never felt the space to be angry and express anger, which I knew intellectually, but somehow hearing, I knew that was a problem with the way we raise girls, but somehow hearing it from them felt really different, and at Asoye, the same young woman said, I read somewhere that, girls who aren't listened to become angry women or something, and she's like, I just didn't feel like I was given the space to express myself and to like feel all the feelings and be validated in that.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. On a more practical issue level, the rise of eating disorders in all kids, but especially girls since the pandemic. Hospitalizations, adolescent hospitalizations for eating disorders have risen 7-fold.
Wow.
So it's really a crisis. It's definitely so.
What do you think do you have any idea what's behind?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Social media definitely plays a big role.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's the triggers can be environmental, but what I learned in my research was how genetic and biological and metabolical the disease is. Mm-hmm. And so we don't, our understanding is still like stuck back in like the 1980s, like after school special about this. It's perfectionistic white girls who want to control things. When in fact, 80% of eating disorders happen in kids with larger bodies. They are completely missed in some populations, like, girls of color, because they're not thought of as a vulnerable population to this. And they can happen for a variety of reasons. So you can go, maybe you had oral surgery, maybe you cut something out for Lent, and you get into an undernourished state, and the undernourished brain acts a certain way and in vulnerable people and can kick off an eating disorder in 2 weeks.
Yes.
It's very quick. And I think if more people understood how it can happen and thought of it less as this stigmatized mental health problem, they would take action earlier. I think a lot of people are afraid to bring it up with their kids if they see their kid changing their eating behavior, or they see their kid losing weight, or they're afraid, like, what if I introduce the idea to them? Absolutely not. They know about it, and it's way better to just engage them and find out what's going on. And it's not enough to just say, well, she's in therapy. Like, she actually has to be renourished,
exactly.
And that's a starved brain can't work properly. So if we understood it more, it would be like cancer treatment. If you knew your kid had cancer, you wouldn't not give them the treatment. So your kid has an eating disorder, you don't withhold treatment, So that's, and that's not anyone's fault. And diet culture blinds us to it, because it's like, your 10-year-old says she wants to eat healthier, and you think that's a good thing, eating healthier. But actually that's a red flag. And you need to ask her, what does eating healthier mean? And if it means like, I want to eat more veggies and protein so that I can, do Girls on the Run, great. But if it means I'm cutting out all sugar, I'm not eating carbs, those are red flags.
Yeah.
And that child is going to be vulnerable to developing.
I think the thing about, so I know a lot about eating disorders. I had an eating disorder when I was younger, and then I had an eating disorder after my kidnapping when I was in treatment. And the kidnapping is what triggered it off. And so then I was in treatment, and I remember that mine was initially sparked when I was a kid, because I was the only one abused, and my mother would feed my brothers and make me watch. And I learned at a very young age, well, if I'm not hungry, it's not hurting me, right? And so then later, after the kidnapping, when I was in treatment, I lost control of everything else. So I was like, oh, wait, I know I can control this one thing, right? And I remember afterwards just talking with people, and they would say, I don't understand what's so hard, just eat. And I would say, that is such a great idea. I never thought about it.
Yeah, I haven't been thinking about that 24/7, actually.
Right, exactly. Thank you for your brilliant idea. I actually, on my first podcast, and we'll put, for anyone interested in learning more about eating disorders, we will put 2 links in the podcast in the show notes. So check those out. I interviewed a girl, and then the subsequent interview is her mother, talking about her treatment and about how it saved her life. And her mother now is very big advocate for educating the world on eating disorders. And it was really fascinating to see from a mother, because the other thing she talked about as well is that it's also educating the family, and it's really involving the whole family. And I see this a lot with mental disorders, where individuals perhaps go into treatment, and it's like taking a sick tree out of a sick forest, and then you put them into a nursery and you help them thrive, in theory, if they go to a good place. And then you send them home and put them right back in that sick forest. And you wonder why they have these struggles. So this idea, so when I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about Strong as a Mother and Strong as a Girl, are really the idea that the girls can read this at some stage when it's appropriate for them. I don't know what age you would recommend that. But educating the whole family about what it is to help these individuals live their best life.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I just want to remark on is, probably as a child, when you discovered you could survive with eating less, it also, your brain it's evolutionarily designed to protect you from hunger. And that means for some people, it actually makes you feel better to be hungry. Mm-hmm. So it might have even been a little bit of a balm to you for whatever was going on.
Right.
And that's something most people don't understand. And there's been a total flip. They used to say over-controlling mothers caused eating disorders, and you had to take the kid out and put them in residential treatment. And that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So now there's a lot of focus on family-based treatment, family serving as and that's not easy, but family serving as the main place of renourishment if possible. And including them in, therapy and everything. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this program that the mother now runs is a family-based, and the children stay in the home, but they work with the entire family.
Yes.
And I think that's the key, is working with the entire family, because otherwise I think it ends up being that this child is the problem child, and then that just has other compounding impact on both the family dynamics and that individual and the kind. And I love too how you were talking about, for example, Strong as a Girl, is that oftentimes we're in reactive mode in our parenting and the decisions we make. And instead, if we can focus on let's set a solid foundation, the best that we can, and then continue to learn and grow and be in more of a proactive mode versus that reactive mode.
Yeah. And I want to say I have so much compassion for parents, particularly moms, because if you have a body in this, if you're a female identifying person with a body in this society, you have gotten the message at some point that your body is wrong in some way.
Yes.
And you are living with that belief somewhere in there. And so a lot of moms are working with their own struggles with this, and so I do have a lot of resources in there and ways to work on promoting, your daughter's healthy relationship with her body, which to me is really about not necessarily body positivity or even body neutrality, but her understanding that her body is for her and like how it works for her, and that's what we gauge it by, not how it looks and compares to others. But I have resources to help parents, but in particular, I'm mostly speaking to moms in this case, to do some work for themselves on this topic, or to outsource this topic if it is just too triggering. Maybe they grew up with an eating disorder, or maybe weight stigma is just still really heavy on their hearts and their daily existence. And in that case, like, let's get you help. That's the Strong as a Human part. Like, let's see what. Is
that going to be your next book, Strong as a Human?
I don't know. It's my Substack. No, first I got to do the thriller. Then I'll figure out what my next nonfiction book is. But yeah, so all throughout the book is I'm just compassionate with, as I said, we're all products of, this water we swim in. And so we're going to make all kinds of mistakes, but we can always repair. And that in itself is some of the most powerful parenting you can do.
So who is your target audience for Strong as a Girl then?
So it is written for caregivers and parents of elementary age kids who identify as girls.
Okay.
And so that's ages 5 to 12. That includes upper elementary. But honestly, someone with a girl in middle school or even high school can benefit. I mean, these are really, I chose that demographic because I wanted to help instill this foundation earlier. It's a little easier, right? Like, when you're explaining to your 6-year-old that she's the boss of her body, so, don't let someone push you down the slide, that's an easier conversation than when you're sitting down with your 16-year-old and she's dating and you want to be like, you're in charge of your body. If you've had that conversation at 6, it's much easier at 16. You've established this ongoing conversation about these topics. So, and, little kids are programmed to listen to you and to be molded by you because they depend on you for survival. They reach the adolescent and teen years and they appropriately, push you away. So it's just a fertile time. But the advice in it can apply to me. It could apply to an 80-year-old man. A lot of it is basic emotional intelligence and ways to access it, and very practical ways to access it versus just saying, have an open conversation. Well, if you don't know how to have an open conversation, being told to have an open conversation.
It's like being told to, why don't you just eat?
Why don't you just eat? Yeah. You're like, I would if I could.
Right.
So,
that is.
Yeah. So I put language in there and conversation starters and mantras to have in your head when all you want to do is fix this problem of your crying kid in front of you. But
what are a couple of the mantras that can you think of?
Oh,
I know I'm putting you on spot.
Yeah, no. So in particular, it's hard for parents to see their kids struggle, and we've all absorbed this narrative that we are entirely responsible for these products we're producing, and we better get it right because there's 1,000 ways to get it wrong, and so there's all this pressure, and we feel like we need to fix problems for our kids. When in fact what they need is to go through problems themselves, in an appropriate, age-appropriate, scaled way. So for that, and it's not easy when your kid is really upset. So I say to myself, like, all storms, when she was little, my girls were little, all storms pass. And I would tell them that as a mantra too. Getting older and getting into teen years, I want her to have this struggle in the safety of my home so she learns she can manage it when she's out. When it comes to allowing girls to make mistakes, we're like so mistake averse in our culture.
We are.
I need to step back so she can step up. This is, it's her time to drive. for like letting your kid climb a tree, which is a paralyzing thing for parents nowadays, look away. Honestly, if that's the only way you can let your kid climb up on that wall or do that thing that at worst will end up in a broken arm, look away.
When we were talking about the target audience and you say caregivers and, you parents of daughters or those who identify as girls, I was also thinking about expanding what people think of as far as the caregiver role.
Yes.
Because caregivers includes your elementary school teachers, your daycare teachers, your church, your coaches for sports, anyone who volunteers in a role that's surrounded by these, because oftentimes we can be the impact to that young girl that they may not get from home.
And right. So and they should, like, a supportive community, like you said, what's my community? A supportive community is key. And so having multiple adults who can play the same role or different roles, supportive roles, is really important. Also grandparents and foster parents. And, this all goes back to that experience in pregnancy when I read those books and felt like I don't see myself reflected anywhere in here. So I didn't want anybody raising or helping to lift up a girl to read this book and say it doesn't apply to me.
Yes.
And then I feel really alone in whatever my struggle is, right? So I was also really careful. I included a whole section on raising neurodivergent girls, girls of color, Black girls, girls with physical disabilities, LGBTQIA plus kids. I really wanted, I can't speak to every possible experience, but as much as I could have the book speak to your particular experience as a parent or caregiver, I wanted you to be able to find like a purchase, a place to land in the book. And of course, raising any of those could be entire books or series of books in themselves. So I also include resources in all those sections, but I really I wanted everyone to feel like they had a place to land when they opened the book. But also, there's this concept called universal design, which it's used most in education and in city planning, which is basically you create a wheelchair ramp for someone in a wheelchair, but it also makes it easier for people with strollers, the elderly, runners to navigate that intersection. So similarly, the same openness with which you talk to your daughter about her autism diagnosis and help her feel, good in her skin in that moment and through that journey is the exact same openness that will benefit any girl learning who she is and what she wants to be, right? So it's not actually, there are specific challenges for sure, particularly, girls of color face adultification bias in elementary school that is really harmful. So there are specific challenges, of course, but there are also universal experiences of just figuring out who you are and how you fit into the world.
Well, and I also think that just taking a moment to take a step back and look at girls differently than what the status quo or how we were judged for so many decades, right? And just taking a pause to ponder, oh wait, because the reason I remember when I first met you, when you were about to release this and start doing podcasts, and I asked you to be on this podcast, and you're like, why do you want me to be on a leadership podcast? I don't write on leadership. And the reason is because you're writing a book and you're inspiring the next generation of female leaders. And these core skills that the people who read it and the girls that are going to drive, those are the skills that we want the next generation of leaders to have. And that's really powerful to me.
Yes. And honestly, we need more female leaders.
Yes.
So we need to, not every girl's going to be a leader, and that's cool too. But to the extent that we can support those that have that inclination and, being their best selves, learning how to take care of themselves, learning to advocate for themselves, learning assertive speech. We don't teach girls assertive speech. So when I was researching the assertive speech section and I Googled learning assertive speech, and I Googled for girls, all the videos were teaching women assertive speech because they get to the workplace, they get to wherever, and they haven't been taught it. So I thought, well, let's solve this earlier. Let's not have, the 26-year-old in her, early career trying to figure out how to talk to her boss about a raise or whatever.
Yes.
Let's teach girls how to do it. So that was interesting. Another area where I sort of thought of this parallel of adults versus girls is toxic friendships, or friendships that don't,
yes.
where you're giving more than, you're giving more than you're taking. And when I Googled that, it was a lot of stuff for, it's a lot of, you see it on Instagram, and perimenopause is a great time where you're like, I'm setting boundaries down. I'm saying no. But it's like, well, how about we teach that to a 6-year-old?
Yes.
So that she doesn't have to have that epiphany in perimenopause, and she can live that truth her whole life. She can know that no is a complete sentence, not just related to her body safety, which is important, but related to, do I want to be friends with this person? Are they filling my bucket? Do I like soccer? My mom really wants me to do it, but it's not really vibing with me. All the different ways that we don't encourage girls even to quit, and that was something Annie Duke, I think I told you to see if you could get her on your podcast. I couldn't even get her to talk to me for my book, but she wrote a book on the art of quitting. She's a poker player turned cognitive scientist, and poker players, the best skill, the number one skill of poker players is knowing when to fold them.
Right.
And she's like, we do not like stories of quitters in our culture. It's all just push, 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 do the thing,
Never give up.
Never give up. We'd rather see people perish in peril than make a wise choice that this path is not for me.
Yep.
And so
we see that in careers all the time. The interview I did just before this, we were talking about the number of people who hate their jobs, and yet they feel as if they have no other choice. They have to be in this role. They're just paralyzed to be able to say, wait, this is not for me. And oftentimes I also see people who perhaps went to school for a certain thing, and then they actually went into that field and then later decided they hated it. They think, wait, I spent all this money, all this time, all of these stories.
I don't want to disappoint X, Y, and Z.
These other people. I don't want to hurt my reputation. I don't want people to see me as a quitter.
The quitter is the worst thing, right?
Yes.
And quitting is a beautiful skill. It's a beautiful act of self-advocacy when something is not working for you. Now, there's a difference if you want to also encourage girls and everyone to take risks, and especially in areas where they feel held back. Mm-hmm. But my now 13-year-old, I think she was 10 or maybe even 9, and all her friends were going to sleepaway camp, and she always worried about homesickness, and so she wanted to go. So she asked if she could go to therapy to learn how to manage this anxiety around homesickness, and she went to camp, and she enjoyed it, but she had a couple nights where she was like, nope, too homesick. And so the next year she didn't want to go. And she said, I think I should go back to therapy to make this decision. Mm-hmm. And even her therapist, who I love, but even her therapist, I felt there was a bias towards pushing her to expose herself to this. And I knew she didn't want to go again. I knew she would only go because of FOMO. And she came back from one of the therapy sessions, and they were like, she's decided, she's really excited to go. And I was like, no, she's not. And then that night, Mom, and I said, you think you're doing the brave thing by doing the thing, but in a culture that is hell bent on always doing the thing, saying no, this is not for me, is bravery. That's taking a risk. And so I think that's something that none of us are really taught, but especially women.
Yeah.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah. And the reality, as we know in healthcare, that pain often means you need to pause and actually reflect and see what's happening with your body. And sometimes it is to where you really want something, and so you're going to become slowly stronger, and you're going to ease back and then go for it. You do this in order to become stronger. And other times, like you're saying, it's just like, wait, I could instead, because my big thing, and so I love no as a complete sentence. I remember that was my favorite component in Cloud and Townsend's book, Boundaries. And I love to say everything you're saying no to, everything you say yes to means you're saying no to something else. Right. So you have to choose your yeses wisely. Right. So in these instances, like, wait, do I want to go to sleepaway camp and be miserable half the time? Or do I want to, I don't know, do X, Y, and Z and enjoy the whole thing in the summer and have these memories that I'm going to love? Which one do I want to do? Yeah. And having the ability to pause, which I think too is teaching parents how to listen to their children and encourage and wait, like pause, like read the body language and not assume they're saying something, or maybe ask more, be more curious to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's honestly, that if there's one message in my book, it's pause, ask questions, listen to the answers, because we feel like we have to have the answers, but our daughters have the answers already, even if they're very teeny tiny seeds of answers. They're in there, and so the more we encourage them to look at them and nourish them and water them, then they grow into real self-knowledge. But spoiler alert, and I think, parents are nervous. Well, I didn't push my kid to do the thing. They'll never do this, Spoiler alert, she went to camp last year, had a blast. She's going to go for 3 weeks this year, so I think her process of being able to stay true to her instincts made her more comfortable with making the decision to go last year again. And that was part.
I think she felt less trapped.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like she was making this choice for herself.
Freedom.
Yeah. So I think that's, and I'm sure that applies in the world of leadership as well.
Yes.
And certainly, I think what I see sometimes is leaders who are not good managers because they don't know how to pause and listen and actually find out what the needs are of the people that they are, in charge of.
Well, because we're taught at a very young age to stop asking the question why. And it's hysterical when you think about it, because one of the things in engineering and in leadership and working with teams, I talk to them about the 5 whys. And really, you need to, when you're
What are the 5 whys?
It's like every time you ask a question, like you say you want to, you're building this type of technology, let's just say for an example, and I need to come with a better example for this, then I would say or you're having this problem in your corporate structure, okay? Maybe you're losing money at this. Then you want to immediately go to what you think the answer is. But if instead you say, well, why are we doing this? Well, because we pushed this software fix out too quickly. Well, why did you do that? Well, because of, and really what it does, it helps you get to the heart of the problem.
To the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what they call it, the 5 whys, is that you really, and when you start doing the 5 whys to someone who's not done it before, they get really frustrated, just like we did as parents with young kids who kept saying, but why? But why? But why?
Just because.
Exactly. And I think that's what it is that teaching us to go back to encouraging the whys, but also encouraging when we see someone role model to us that they're curious about how we feel, that they will listen, they will respect what we have to say, then they learn that's appropriate behavior to then reflect on people that they're in relationships with.
Yes.
And that's what you want as a badass leader, as a mother, as a partner, is you want the person that has those skills. And these are some of the things that we can model by allowing us to do this with our children at young ages.
I totally agree with everything you just said. And you can get out of having to answer all the whys if you put it back on them sometimes too. That's, well, why do you think that? And they might go off on a totally crazy direction that's fun and whatever, or my daughter, the same one about sleeping camp, will often be like, but what do you think, Mom? Like, I would try to do that with her. My older daughter was like, well, I know exactly how I feel, da-da-da-da-da. And then I would do that with her sister, and she'd say, well, but I want to know what you really think about it. So she was harder, but so I'd say, well, I'll tell you, but I got to hear just whatever pops in your head first. I would just really encourage her to ask and to think about answers to questions. And what you said about when girls are taught that they will be listened to and respected and that they can have influence, then they expect that to be their interaction with the world. It may not always be, but they will put themselves out there with that expectation, and they will have the coping skills to manage when the world doesn't act like they're awesome mom. But
they'll have practice,
But
right?
they'll have practice with
They're
then
also
navigating that.
in a safe environment where it's okay to fail,
Yep.
where it's okay to say no, where it's okay to have boundaries, where it's okay to have bad days because you're still going to be loved regardless. Where, and I know that I'm painting a picture perfect family and household, and we're not all like that. But still, if there's ever a time that we can cultivate this in the caregivers and the parents and the next generation, because the thing I love as well about this is that every caregiver or mother, teacher, grandparent, whatever, that learns these skills and imparts them on these young girls, every single one of them is going to grow up and impart it on the next generation and the next generation. And imagine the difference that can be made in the world and the next generation of leaders and collaborators and nurturers, that we're creating by that cascade impact.
Definitely. And, I do relate to the idea of being a leader in one way, which is I think I'm a micro leader. I am sharing what I've learned and what I've researched and what I know to be true to impact the lives of one girl at a time. And that's how I want to change, the numbers of girls who are self-harming or having suicidal ideation or any of the struggles, is on the micro level. And I do think that my voice is a leader in that way. And also, you don't have to be perfect to do this. You actually have to screw up. You actually have to make mistakes. And then you can process those mistakes. You can have a bad day and be like, you know what? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you about your dirty room. It was not about your dirty room. It was about this email I just got. I'm going to go have a cup of tea, respond to that email. Can we have a do-over? We did do-overs, resets all the time.
Yes.
Both when my kids were little and they had a big outburst or when we did, I'm feeling really sad today. I forgot grandmother's birthday, your grandmother's birthday. I feel terrible. I'm not the only person who's ever forgotten their mother's birthday. Right. A lot of people do that.
Right.
And because I'm feeling bad about it, I'm going to be nice to me. I'm not going to beat up me. I'm going to, again, get a cup of tea, listen. For me, it's Jigsaw Puzzles and the Big Chill soundtrack, like whatever it is, self-compassion. So that's a huge part of the book, is teaching caregivers self-compassion for themselves and instilling it in their girls, because self-compassion, it's the hug that lets you get the cry out. It's the teammate that, holds your hand as you get back onto the field, and it's, the team cheering you on instead of, self-esteem, which requires success. To feel self-esteem, you have to succeed at things. And so you're 6 years old, you're in kindergarten, you can't stand in the line because you're fidgeting and you get in trouble. Well, if you have self-compassion, if you know that you're good just because of who you are, just because you're a human, just because of who you are, who you are as Angela Gilden-Elms or Kate Rope, then you're not bad because you stepped out of line. You just stepped out of line. That was a thing that happened instead of, it
doesn't define you as a human.
That's right.
It's a behavior and a moment in time.
Right, exactly. So, and because girls are trained to be good and want to be good,
want to please.
It's especially important for them to have that compassion for those kind of moments. And for girls, self-esteem is highly dependent on appearance. So they don't even have control over that. Or if they think they do, they may get into trouble with it. So, self-compassion says, okay, I'm having a day where I feel uncomfortable in these jeans, or I, wish my hair was straight instead of curly, or curly instead of straight, which is what I always wanted. Everybody feels that way about themselves sometimes. And how can I be a little nicer to myself today when I'm feeling that way?
I want to go back to when you were commenting about also the reset and saying to our kids, like when we make mistakes or something. I had a moment recently, I have an autistic daughter. And so I strongly believe in role modeling when I make a mistake at work. I'll say it, and I'll say it out loud in front of everyone, because I want them to know it's okay to make mistakes, because I make mistakes and I'm just going to call it out in front of everyone. Right. And so I had this moment recently. You know, my daughter unfortunately struggles with very horrible menstrual cycles. Okay, one day I get this text message from her, and like the first text message, mind you, she's in the basement. I'm one floor up, and this is the world
This is
we live in,
2025,
right? And she sends me this text message that I think is like really harsh. You know, I'm like, okay, whatever. And then the next message she sends me, she goes, you know what? I'm just going to let you know, like, I just had my period and I'm just not feeling good. So if I end up being, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but she's kind of like, if I end up being short or something, it's not you. It's just I'm not feeling good right now. And I was like,
You taught her that.
I was like, oh my God, I love that. And I just responded. I said, okay, thank you for letting me know. Love you. And it was just one of those moments that I said, you know what? How amazing for you to just call it out. Like, it's just a fact. I'm not feeling very good. My hormones are all over the place. So it's not you. And anyway, I think that was a moment that just reminded me that we need to be vulnerable. And by showing vulnerability, we're also showing that we're humans and that it's good and okay to be human.
Yeah. Yes. And I've seen my daughters do similar things. And one time I remember my older daughter studying for an exam. She was very stressed, and her little sister just wanted to like talk and goof around. And she snapped at her. And then she said, I'm sorry. I'm really stressed about this test, and I just need space to study. And I had, I don't think that my teenager has to be perfect all the time. If she snaps at her sister, I'll say to her like, hey, don't take it out on your sister. But then I'll say to her sister, I think your sister's really stressed. Let's give her space, Right. Because I want her to understand that too. And so, they both internalized that, or one time I was really mad about something. It was in a time when I was struggling a couple years ago, and I was just yelling about something as we were leaving, and both my girls were trying to offer solutions. Like, I think you'll just feel better, Mom, if you do. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm just not going to feel better. I just really am upset. And I was just like dug in, and they were like, okay, that'll probably change. Like it was they weren't scared by it because they know that I've talked through this stuff with them before. They know that I know how to take care of myself. And so they were just like, all right, I think it'll change.
But it's teaching conflict resolution on such a high emotional intelligent level that feeds into so many future interactions that they'll have.
100%.
Because we often, when someone barks at us or says something rude to us out in the world, our initial response is often, why are they a mean person? Or what did I do wrong?
Defensive,
right? Or angry, and we then assimilate with them that they are this horrible, mean person, or we make up all these stories in our head when perhaps it's just that, I don't know, they have a puppy that kept them up all night and pooped in the kennel or something like that, right? And they didn't get enough sleep. But it's often something totally unrelated to what the actual situation is.
Yeah.
And I think just learning that as well stressed about studying or something, it's not this, but because it comes out at those other times, and learning that skill to identify that and sit with that and not attribute it to, oh, they hate me, or
right.
The stories that we've often
told ourselves. I'm going to shut myself off from that person.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think this is particularly important with girls. And, I have a whole section on how to let your girl express her anger. And, I know some parents will read that and be like, this is way too wishy-washy for me, right? So I say in the book, if this is sounding too wishy-washy, know that you can have boundaries within this. You can say, I hear that you are really upset. We don't treat other people in our family this way when we're upset. We're going to give you space.
And a reset.
And a reset, but it's not okay, And so similarly, I'll give you a real world story where I realized I had overdone it on the appreciation of humanity scale for my girls. I'm just the kind of person that talks to everyone when I meet them on the street. I talk to unhoused people. We keep bags, in our car of essentials to give out to them. And I'm willing to, I've lived in New York City the longest I've ever lived anywhere. I'm very comfortable on the street with different kinds of people. And But I also am a keen observer and am very protective of myself. And that's how I've kept myself safe as a woman. So, but I think I was modeling in this era of my life, I was modeling just so much kindness to everyone that my older daughter was by herself in a parking lot, and a guy came up to her and he asked for money first. And she said, I don't have any. And then he said, oh, well, my car broke down. I need a jump. And we have this little this awesome thing where you can jump your own car. These things are amazing.
I have one too. Yeah.
And she was like, well, I don't have cables, but I have this thing. And so he's like, okay, great. So she goes around the trunk, opens it up, gives it to him. And then she's like, should I come with you while you use it? He's like, no, I'll just use it and give it back to her. Well, he stole it. Right. Fine. That's the best outcome that story could have had. Because went around to the back of the car, opened the car. And I realized in my emphasis on everyone is a human being with a story and a struggle, I had not driven home some points. So I was like, hey, okay, we're going to go over this. I don't care that thing was stolen. What I care, in fact, I'm glad it was that was the worst case. But you are alone by yourself. You do not need to talk to men. You don't owe them any explanation. If a man approaches you, you like give him the sorry, not open for talking right away. I was like, you're a girl by yourself, you're a female by yourself, and you are at risk. And so, so it can go too far in that direction. And so my younger daughter is actually much more, she's like me. She has more anxiety, so she's naturally more suspicious and whatever. And we were having a conversation the other day about something a male teacher did that she was uncomfortable with. And I asked her how she wanted to handle it. And she said, I'm going to say something tomorrow. And she did handle it. But the next night she said, is it wrong for me to be suspicious of male teachers? And I said, no. I was like, we want everyone to be kind and good. But we know that in this world,
not everyone is kind and good.
Yeah, and that the majority of crimes are men hurting women. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have to act on it, but you absolutely are allowed to feel whatever you feel inside your head and act accordingly, And so she was like, okay, and I said, and I want you, let's talk about this if something else comes up. And I think this teacher's just kind of goofy and socially awkward. I don't at this point think anything else is going on. And my daughter just notices everything. But so she came another day and said, he said something weird today or whatever. I was like, okay, what was it? And I said, yeah, I don't love that one. I said, is this at the point where we say something to the school? And she said, no, I don't think so. And I really trust her to tell me when it is that point.
Right.
Right.
I mean, but I love that she felt like she could come to you and
and
ask,
I will act even if she, if I. Right. Because it is I think it's probably just a socially awkward teacher who's trying to connect with kids. That's my gut, and my gut is highly tuned.
Yeah.
But I love that we had this conversation, and I was able to say to her, like, okay, and she said, the first time she told me, she's like, I don't want you to freak out, because I know she knows that I'm, this feminist mom is going to, don't, but I didn't, I was like, okay, I was like, tell me what you think and tell me how you handled it. And, obviously if she was 7, it would be a different conversation. And I talk in the book about how my parents saved me from a child predator when I was 6 because they listened to their gut and they pulled me from a ballet school that was shut down 3 months later because the guy was abusing 6-year-old blonde girls like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
wow. Hearing your daughter's story, I had two instances in Atlanta where men pulled up in their car, like when I was out walking, one asking for directions to like a Walmart. He was right near here, right? And I was like, there's not, but I was just being kind. And someone in my history, I have no idea why I was still being kind. I'm not anymore. Next thing I know, I'm like really confused. And I'm like, there's not a Walmart really close to here. There's a Target or whatnot. And then all of a sudden I realize he was exposing himself. And I had that happen on 2 different instances recently. And so as a consequence of that, and my daughter was just working with Emory Autism Center. And one of the things in the evaluation that her doctor said is that for someone like her that she never says anything mean about anyone. She loves all people, is that she could be very vulnerable. So I've had so many but she has great boundaries. She's like, oh, no worry. I just because I'm always worried about her walking to places, right? And she's like, oh, no worry. I just be like, nope, I don't want to talk to you. Exactly what you're saying. But there are things that we also have to be aware of is that, yes, we humans are humans.
Humans are humans.
And they have stories, and yet hurt people, and we have to.
You don't need to be a part of that journey for them.
Yeah. Those are powerful. Okay, I have some rapid fire questions. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
I think I'm probably gonna be terrible at this. Let's try it.
Okay. Well, Miss Kate Rope, what does leaving a legacy mean to you?
Oh gosh. It means leaving the world a better place than I found it, and primarily right now that is through raising 2 strong girls and supporting other people raising strong girls. But it's also every time I lift up like another human being in any everyday interaction. It's just as best I can, I want to leave the world a better place than I found it.
I love it. Okay, what's a piece of advice you wish more young women ignored?
Be nice.
I love that. Full stop. Okay, a book or mentor that has most shaped your leadership?
Untangled by Lisa D'Amour is, which is a fantastic book on raising teen girls, has definitely influenced my outlook in regards to the leadership I'm doing through the book.
When you hear the phrase strong as a human, what comes to mind?
Being comfortable in your own skin, having coping skills and knowing the resources you need to support yourself when you're struggling, and feeling like you're good enough.
Oh, I love that. I just got chills the last piece of it. What's one leadership trait that you're still working on?
Gosh, leading. I mean, owning my badassery.
That's what I would say.
That's definitely a struggle for me. And that goes back to, I think, what we're talking about with the conditioning of girls. And, even though I had all this support to be exactly myself, I still live in this world that didn't condition, it's fine if men step up and say, I got this. But if women do, it's bragging or it's, So yeah, that's my frontier that I'm working on right now with limited success so far, but some.
I love it. Well, I'm going to look forward to watching the journey. So now tell the listeners where they can find your book. I also know that you recorded the audio book. Is it on Audible yet?
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's on Audible and Amazon and anywhere you get your audio books.
Show them the book one more time.
So, Strong as a Girl, it is sold wherever you buy books. And I have a Substack, Strong as a Human. I am on Instagram at Kate Rope Writer. And my website is katerope.com.
I love it. Well, thank you I know you're super busy and really busy talking about the book all over. So thank you for taking time out of today to spend time with us to talk about this important topic.
Thank you. And just a personal thank you to you for helping me create a podcast studio in my home on your own time. I will repay you through supporting your book, but you're an inspiration to me in getting in touch with, and you were like, you are badass from the get-go. And I was like, okay, I'm badass. I'm a badass. It's not that I have a problem cussing. I cuss a lot. It's more just, it's just, I got to own it.
Yes.
So thank you for your inspiration in doing that.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was amazing. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.